just located in Farmington. Oh, that's a small detail. So I'm a damn Yankee. So I got involved with butterflies many years ago, but really more closely about 6 or 8 years ago when I was tasked with coordinating and producing the West Virginia Butterfly Atlas. And then in 2017, we went to a meeting in Texas, and it turns out, it was a monarch meeting, and it turns out that West Virginia is deep into conservation, or needs to be deep into conservation for monarchs, because half of the state is in what's called the North Core. We'll go over this, but it's where the North Core, which is a band underneath the Great Lakes, is where most of the butterflies that actually make it to Mexico come from, and so we're important for that. So monarchs and butterflies and Lepidoptera and pollinators sort of took over my life a few years ago, and I'm now the coordinator for the state for all this stuff, so we'll see how we go. So this is a general program on pollinators. We were hoping to go outside. Pollinators really don't like rain a whole heck of a lot. So if it's still raining by the time I finish this, we'll come up with some other things to do. So I've got plenty of stuff I can teach you if you're interested. So we'll get started. There are handouts up here. The cord is a little short, so be extremely careful because it's a tripping hazard right here. So be very careful if you come up here. When you come up to look at stuff, we'll take a break. Come around this side because this is kind of dangerous. Okay. So pollinator conservation and management. So in the DNR, you know, it's deer, bear, turkey, smallmouth bass, things like that. Bugs really didn't interest a lot of traditional wildlife management folks unless they were parasites on some of the bigger things. But that's been changing over the years, which is good for me since that's what I seem to be doing. So increasingly, these less traditional species have been spotlighted, like some of our crayfish. This is running buffalo clover right in here. Those are seed heads, freshwater mussels, green salamanders, and of course our state reptile, the eastern timber rattlesnake. And including invertebrates, especially in the last few years when pollinators have become much more in the news, as it were. So initially, though, invertebrates were just of interest, and we knew more about them if it was used as bait, such as mayflies, aquatic insects, as a pest species like a mosquito, or if it was a very attractive and charismatic species. This is a wonderful butterfly called the regal fritillary, which formerly occurred in West Virginia when we had a lot more open land, but its stronghold is out in the Midwest and the prairie states. So large chunks of natural history are actually missing from a large proportion of common species, even monarch butterflies. They're still doing scads of research on that, and we're still finding new things out. So we host several taxa of rare and declining invertebrates, such as mussels, land snails, cave invertebrates, spiders, dragonflies, mayflies, butterflies, and moths. And several taxa actually need examining in the state, especially bees, which we're taking a run at this last few years, beetles and flies. We know nothing about beetles and flies, which are some of the most numerous invertebrates that we have. So pollinators. Most flowering plants, about 80%, depend upon insect pollination. So the other 20% are wind or water pollinated, things like grasses, or a lot of the trees like oak trees are wind pollinated. That's why you sneeze and stuff in the spring, is because of them. Most pollination is done by bees. They're specialized to pollinate flowers because of various body parts, like branched hairs on their body, and other characteristics of behaviors. They're also helped out by butterflies and moths, some flies, a few wasps, hummingbirds, some beetles, and accidentally by other insects and other organisms. Plants and pollinators tend to walk a fine line between mutualism and pollinator parasitism. Here's a chunky old bumblebee. Doesn't have a long enough tongue. Bees have different sizes of tongues. There's short-tongued bees and long-tongued bees. This is a short-tongued bee, and he can't get all the way down to the nectary down here, so it's chewing. So sometimes you see damage on tubular flowers like this. They've been raided by bees that have chewed through the base to get at the nectar. So unfortunately the pollination is up here, and so those flowers won't be pollinated because of that. And that's a natural thing that happens. Not all flowers get pollinated, but that's something you can see. You think of it as this wonderful kumbaya thing between bees and flowers. It's a little more complicated than that, though. Bees belong to order Hymenoptera, the bees, wasps, ants, and sawflies. Most are solitary. The honeybees and bumblebees that are social, that have the queen that stays in the nest and the workers that go out and do stuff, and the drones that just mate with the queens, that's the exception to the rule. Most bees are solitary. The females breed with males, the males die, the females go out and do their own thing. They build their own nest, which is usually in the ground or in a pithy stem, for example. Like if you put out bee blocks for orchard bees or something like that, that's a typical nesting sort of situation for these solitary bees. For identification, bees have 2 pairs of wings. There's one there and one there. They have a wasp waist, so you have the head, which is fair size, sort of a roundish or rectangular thorax, and then it goes down to a little pinch at the waist, and then a larger abdomen here. So that's typical sort of body plan for these guys. The antenna is often bent. You see this on this bumblebee right here. Has chewing mouth parts and a tube-like tongue. And again, some are short, some are long. And the body is typically hairy. Wasps, which are pollinators, they typically don't have hair on their body, or very little, and they certainly don't have specialized hairs that are branched to hold that pollen. And on some of these bees, they specialize on certain flowers, and so the hairs are actually, the appearance of them or the structure of them is actually has evolved to hold on to certain types of pollen, like from one species or just a genus of plants. So they can be extremely specialized. They have complete metamorphosis. They go from egg, larva, pupa, and adult. So you have the egg, the larvae looks like a little worm-like thing, and then it pupates, and then you get the adult. We have about 314 species in West Virginia, but we're doing research on them, so that number is in flux, certainly. I don't know if less than 100 are important for pollination. Depends upon, this is an older program. Depends upon what we're talking about. This is probably agricultural crops, important for pollination, because all the bees do pollination. Again, some of them are very specialized on just native species, for example. So bees versus wasps. This is a little andreniid bee, and there's looks like a hornet. So it's fuzzy, little or no hair. Help humans by pollinating plants. But this helps humans by eating other insects. Wasps are predaceous. They're typically gentle in nature. You can walk through a clover field or walk through your garden and disturb the bees by walking past. They're not going to do a thing to you. It's no big deal. Wasps tend to be more aggressive and ready to sting, especially if you're near their nest. And a good way to do it when they're flying, the legs are usually hidden when they're flying. The bees sort of tuck them up, while you can see wasps sort of trailing behind them. You see wasps flying. So that's a good way, just when they're flying, to determine if it's a bee or a wasp. So that's kind of handy. Okay. Bees evolved probably from predaceous wasps. So bees and wasps had a common ancestor. During the Cretaceous, which is when we had a vast radiation of angiosperms or flowering plants, which makes a lot of sense. Bees likely evolved when they had nectar and pollen that they could take advantage of. Nectar is a high energy reward for pollinators. It's carbs. They also tend to mix it with the pollen that they feed to their young. Bees are herbivorous, so they eat pollen, they feed pollen to their young, they drink nectar for quick energy, but they also will mix that in various degrees. And also oils and such from some of the flowers, they'll mix with the pollen and feed to their young. Pollen is fat and protein rich. It's the major food source. Bees can remove 70 to 90% of the flower's pollen. And not all pollen is created equal. There's various degrees of protein and fat in the pollen, which some species need certain types of pollen in order to thrive. And so that's why some bees are also specializing in certain flowers, because they need that nutritional balance in there. Not all bees have specialized structures on the legs. A lot of them do. Honeybees and bumblebees have the big pollen baskets on the legs. Some bees just have hair, and again, that scopa or branched hairs help to hold the pollen there. Other bees, like this guy, we'll talk about these a little bit later, they have the hairs on the bottom of their abdomen. So this is a whole family of bees that does this. So that's one way to really, it's easy to identify those particular bees, called Megachilidae. And that's some of the solitary bees. Bees see differently than we do. They can see ultraviolet, and flowers have ultraviolet markings on their petals, which act as nectar guides to show the bee where the nectar is. Little landing lights for them at an airport. So relationship of bees and plants is sort of this iconic ecological example of mutualism, but I already mentioned that it can be a little more complicated than that.
Could you give us a quick definition of mutualism?
Certainly. Mutualism is a series of behaviors that two species that are interacting exhibit that benefits both of them. The bee gets nectar and pollen, which is good for them. The plant gets pollinated, which is good for them.
How does that differ from the symbiosis?
Symbiosis, oh boy, this is going back fast. Symbiosis would, I believe, if I'm getting this right, mutualism is sort of a form of symbiosis. It's sort of half and half. Symbiosis is I believe, and anybody stop me if I'm wrong, we'll go off the deep end. Symbiosis is two species interacting, and it isn't necessarily going to be mutual to both of them. It could be mutual, like mutualism, but it also could be benefiting one and sort of neutral to the other, like mistletoe growing on an oak tree, or lichens growing on a tree. It benefits the lichen, it doesn't harm the tree at all, but it doesn't benefit them particularly. So it's that.
Thank you.
So symbiosis has several different subsections for both. Oh, that's pulling it out of the hat. Oops. Okay, we have 6 families of bees that occur in West Virginia. And it's funny, and I'll show you at the end of the program. I'll show you a website where you can identify bees. But we're used to, when we start trying to learn a new taxa, of going from this general to specific. With bees, because the characters that you use are so tiny, you generally can't identify the species live bees. You can tell it's a bumblebee, or you can tell it's one of those Megachilidae because it has the pollen on the bottom of the abdomen. But because the characteristics for families are so tiny, you actually have to kill the things and look at them under dissectoscope. So I'm going to go over the families of bees, but typically you get a bee and you start going, you're going to identify it to genus before you do anything else. And when you get the genus, you can backtrack and say, oh, that genus falls within this family. So it's one of those funky things. Unless when you get really familiar with bees, you can sort of get a gestalt of the common genuses or genre, and you can stick them in the families. So it's a little bit of an odd taxa in that you start with a specific, and then you can move out. So Andrenides or Andrenids are the largest family of bees, about 4,500 species worldwide, about 1,200 in North America. They're ground nesting. A lot of the ground nesting bees are called mining bees because they're digging in the earth. Most of the pollinators that are ground nesters, they need specific soil types in order to do a successful nest. Often it's not really, saturated clay or really wet soils or anything like that. Usually it's a loamy with some good sand component, something like that. It stays reasonably dry, and but it doesn't cave in on them. So it has to be a good mixture of the soil. Common genera are Adrena, Protandrena, and Calliopsis. And I'll show you a picture of Adrena a little bit further on. Next family, Coletidae. And I think, no, I didn't type this out for you. I'm sorry, I was going to make a sheet with this. I apologize. Anyways, these are solitary ground, and also these are some of the ones that will bore into like twigs, like standing goldenrod stems or pithy stems of like, sambucus, elderberries, things like that. And these are also called cellophane bees. The ground nesting ones actually secrete a cellophane-like substance to line their tunnels. And this is to help keep things dry, and it's also a fungicide so that the larvae don't get disease, things like that. Common genera are Coletes and Hylas. This is a simple one also to identify. It has a bunch of yellow on its face. And when you take a break, so I got some ebooks up here, and you can look at it. But you look at it, and it sort of looks like a hornet because it has this black and yellow pattern, but it's a bee because it's fuzzy. But it has a lot of yellow on the face. Meletidae is a small family, only about 3 genera in North America. They're solitary ground nesters. Most are pollen specialists, meaning they only use certain groups or species of plants. Common genera are Melita and Macropsis. Halictides is an easy family to identify because they're very common. Everybody has had experience with these ones. They're sweat bees. You bend over, you bend your knee, and then you get stung because you squish them between your thigh and your calf.
But are they pollinators also, sweat bees?
Oh yeah, all these guys are pollinators. 16 genera in North America. All of them are ground nesting. There's a few species that nest in rotted wood. They get a punky log or stump or something, and they'll go into there. Includes the sweat bees. They exhibit, Halictidae are interesting because they exhibit several social behaviors. They're not strictly solitary. They have like a range. They're not truly social like honeybees, but they come up to the edge, sort of from solitary up to what is called primitively eusocial, where females will use like a common entrance and have some cooperation, but they're still doing their own thing to a large degree. Common genera are Halictus, Lasioglossom. Lasioglossoms, even bee experts, they get to the genus and they stop there. They're teeny, many of them are teeny tiny, like less than 1/8 of an inch long, like a few millimeters. They're small, so it's very difficult to see the structures, but the differences between the species are very minute. Olcott is one of the green sweat bees. Megachilidae, which we talked about a little bit, 18 genera in North America. These guys mostly nest in wood. They have really large mandibles for chewing into wood. So you see them in dead trees. They don't go into like decks and stuff the way the carpenter bees, but they sort of go into dead trees and such. And the females carry the pollen on the underside of their abdomen, if you saw that picture earlier. Common genera are Osmia, the orchard bees, which you put out the bee blocks for, and Megachile, which are also leafcutter bees. You may have seen that where you have little circles cut out of leaves. The ground nesters, Megachile, actually, like the cellophane bees line their nests or tunnels, Megachile line their tunnels with these bits of leaf and sort of glue them there, and again, that's thought to be a protection for the young as they develop. And finally, Apidae, which has some of our most well-known bees, like honeybees and bumblebees. We have 28 genera that occur in North America. Includes honeybees, bumblebees, and carpenter bees, the bane of people who have decks. Includes truly social or eusocial species, the honeybee and the bumblebee. But most are solitary and nest in the ground or in wood, like the carpenter bee. Several are pollen specialists. And Xylocopa are carpenter bees, which are some of the largest bees we have in West Virginia. Ceratina, Eucera, Melissoides, Bombus, Apis. Bombus is the bumblebee, Apis is the honeybee. So here's a few bees. Here's the Andrena on some common milkweed up at Cranesville. And this is at my office, little Bombus. And Melissoides was down at my house in Goldenrod. So that's a quick intro to the bees. I would love to do an ID workshop with everybody, but you had to have dissecting scopes and everything else, so that was beyond this. If you're really interested, when you do your evaluation, you can say, I want a bee ID workshop. It can be a little intimidating. I went down to Sam Droege, who works for the USGS down at Patuxent Wildlife Research Center down in Maryland. I went down there for a few days to his lab to get taught, and it was intense. And I learned them, and now I feel confident I can identify a bee if I get it dead and look at it underneath the scope. But it's just learning the characters. But it's not easy, that's for sure. A lot of technical little things to learn. Okay, here's an Olcott species. This is an old rotting log that was down at Stonewall Jackson. See, it's going into a little hole there. That's the bee. And this was in a bird box at my house. And this is dead, it was in the fall. I was cleaning it out. This is dead larvae. So there was detritus and a bird's nest in the bottom of my old bird box. I guess no, this was in the spring. And they went in there and were using it to nest in. So they sort of burrowed into the rotting sort of vegetation, old nest in the bottom of the thing. So that's some larvae. And here's one of the sweat bees too. There's an elected Queen Anne's lace. And this is a flower fly. You can barely see it back there. So that's one of the flies. And there's another elected right there. Okay, butterflies. Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, all have 2 pairs of stiff wings, covered with scales that give it the pattern and the colors that we all like to see. The antenna is clubbed. It's hard to see on this viceroy, but there's a little knob on the end of the antenna. All butterflies either have a club or like a sickle-shaped hook. The skippers have a little hook. Moths have a filiform sort of antenna, or very feathery, or it could be a spindle shape where it's narrow at the base and just slightly expands out to the tip out there. It has tube-like mouth parts. It has a proboscis that keeps coiled up. When they first emerge, it's in 2 pieces, and they sort of zip it up as they harden up after emerging from their pupa or chrysalis. So they only drink liquids, like nectar, but also water, of course, liquids from rotting fruit or carrion or scat they might find, so only liquid nourishment. They go through a complete metamorphosis, of course, egg, larva, pupa, and adult. About, for butterflies, okay, we estimate about 2,000 moths in West Virginia, but if you take butterflies and moths together, we only have a documentation for about 746 species. We assume there are a lot of moths that either haven't been discovered or even haven't been described to science. There's a lot of undescribed moth species across North America and the world. They're getting described every week. And this, of course, is a viceroy. This is not a monarch. Viceroys have this straight line across the hind wing, which monarchs lack. Monarchs are a little bit larger and fly a little bit differently. So, oh good, here's butterflies versus moths. Butterflies are diurnal, tend to be more delicate, but some moths can be really flimsy and delicate too. Often very colorful, and you see a good picture of that clubbed antenna right there. Moths are mostly nocturnal. They tend to be more robust and hairy. Mostly earth tones, but some can be quite colorful. And you can see the feathered antenna right in here, but this is a female. They're not quite as feathery. This is one of the big silk moths, a Cecropia moth. And this is a painted lady right here. Okay, we have 6 butterfly families that occur in West Virginia and across most of the United States, actually. We have the swallowtails, which tend to be large, usually stripy, black with some other colors. Has a long extension at the bottom of the hind wing. Whites and sulfurs, which is this one and this one. They tend to be white or yellow. It's white and sulfur. Some of our most common butterflies. Gossamer wings are typically small. This is a spring azure. Yeah, it's a spring azure. Azures are blue. You have these things called hair streaks that are usually brown and have this little tiny tail on the bottom of the hind wing, but they're all little. I mean, they're all like the size of your thumbnail. They're from one side, but they're teeny tiny. Often they're spring flyers, though we do have ones that occur all during the growing season, but many of them are fly just in the spring. Metal marks, which I don't have a picture of, we only have one species, which is quite rare, but which actually occurs down in the gorge here at Pipestem State Park, but not until July. Brushfoots, is right here, which are your typical butterflies. Silvery checker spot, monarchs is a brush foot, painted ladies are brush foots. So there's a lot of, and that's a quite variable family. Then you have the skippers, which are these guys right here. They have, you can see here, it's like a little hook on the antenna, a little hard to see, and right there. And they tend to be very fast flyers. They're either spread wing skippers, like this juvenile's dusky wing, or fold wing skippers, where they keep, fold the wings up, like the hind wings are sort of horizontal, and then the forewings go up at a 45-degree angles when they're resting. But they're called fold wing or branded skippers. And they tend to be, browns and oranges to a large extent. There's not a lot of color variation in the skippers, and people are intimidated by them because they can be a little bit tricky to identify, but it's sort of like warblers. Once you figure out what the characteristics are, you can identify them. And I'll go over resources up here and stuff too. So those are our butterflies. So most of them are brushfoots or skippers, are our largest families. All sip fluids through their proboscis, like this spicebush swallowtail on this thistle. Oh, that's a black swallow. That's a black swallowtail. Sorry. There's the proboscis coiled up. And you can sort of see it's in two parts. See the little ridge in the middle? That's where the zipper is. And then, of course, then they have these scales that cover their wings and their body. And actually, it's thought that butterflies and moths actually adapted scales. Their most common ancestor, sort of outgroup when you're doing genetics, are caddisflies, which are aquatic organisms. And they sort of have scales too, and so butterflies and moths sort of evolved that to the nth degree. And it's thought that, especially moths, but butterflies also to some degree, they get caught in spider webs and the silk sticks to the scales. And if they're not wrapped up or anything, they can escape. And so, and they'll leave some scales behind, but the moth flies free to live another night. So it's thought that scales to some degree, as well as being, camouflage or a behavioral device for mating and everything, because they'll do courtship. Males do courtship with their wings and flash them around and everything. But it's also thought to be a mechanism to help avoid predation by spiders. But it doesn't always work. Some leps feed on pollen, especially some of the tropical species, but all have the potential of moving pollen from one flower to another. But they're not specialized like bees. They don't have those branched hairs or anything. But you can see, here's a clear-winged hummingbird. They all have pollen on its head. So it can certainly transfer pollen from flower to flower. There's a zebra longwing, which is a southern species in the U.S. And here's a West African one. Probably this is from lilies. Lilies have that pollen that really gets stuck in everything. So this may be from some sort of lily species. Okay, on to flies. Many flies can look like bees. That's this one. A lot of the flower flies are yellow and black. But they only have one pair of wings, there, and their antennae are little short jobbies. They're not that up and branched. They don't have that long angled antenna the way most Hymenoptera do. The second pair of wing is actually behind the others, and it's called a halter, and it's actually used for sort of balance. It's like a gyroscopic sort of thing. So they do use that, but it is vestigial visually. Mouth parts are for sucking liquids, typically, either piercing, like mosquitoes and horseflies, tubes like flower flies, or sponge like a house fly, will sop up stuff. They have complete metamorphosis, egg, larva, pupa, and adult. Hundreds or maybe thousands of species probably occur in West Virginia. Approximately 7 taxa are known to be pollinators, but it could be a lot more than that. So, because people haven't done a whole lot of research on flies and pollination. This is a spring flying fly, a bee fly. They're pretty much done by now, but there are a lot. You've probably seen this in the spring. That's a little bee fly. It's a little bumblebee mimic, and of course this hoverfly. And these are the ones that are often, this is this species, because there's several different species of hoverfly. It's bigger, and it'll be buzzing, and it sounds really scary. And it buzzes and hovers and looks at you and everything. It's just a fly, it can't hurt you. It's after nectar and pollen. It just is a really good bee mimic, and so it's very intimidating. Many mimic, again, bees and wasps avoid predation. The life histories are variable. Eggs are typically laid near a larval food source, maybe detritus, some feed on aphids, spiders, caterpillars, carcasses. So they don't build a nest per se like, for example, bees do. They sort of drop their eggs near a larval food source and the female just, goes off and the young do their thing. Adults of some species do feed on nectar. Pollination typically occurs accidentally as they, like butterflies, flies don't have those specialized structures to do pollination. Less pollen is transported, but flies are very, very numerous. And so they're actually fairly important for pollination just because of the numbers and quantities of them. Flies are especially important as you go further north, like up and through tundra and Arctic areas, because the growing season is so short, a lot of bees have a tough time up there because the growing season is so short they can't finish their life cycle. So flies do a lot of pollination up in the Arctic. They're very important up there. On to beetles. And beetles are they're fun. I mean, there's a new book came out, which is really fun. Beetles in North America. It's great. I haven't really dug into it a whole lot, but I would like to. Coleoptera beetles are probably the most numerous as far as species and possibly numbers insect order in the world. They're continually discovering new beetles, especially down in the tropical area. So they're very numerous and very important to ecosystems. The abdomen is mostly entirely covered by a rigid wing cover called elytra. The membranous hind wings are underneath it, and those are the structures that are actually used for flight. The top ones aren't used for flight. They just cover them and protect them. Because beetles are sort of running around the ground and going under stuff, and so they don't want their delicate wings getting torn up, so the elytra protect those wings that they use for flying. The exoskeleton may be very robust. Think about June bugs and how chunky they are, or stag beetles. They have chewing mouth parts in both the larval form and the adult form, so they chew on stuff. They have a complete metamorphosis like the other ones we've talked about, other species and taxa. 350,000 species worldwide, and they're still counting. That's probably higher now. 8 taxa are known to pollinate flowers in West Virginia, but that's probably higher as well. This is a soldier beetle that you see in the fall, especially on goldenrods. Most beetles that visit flowers are eating actually the pollen and flower tissues, and they're rummaging around on the flower, and they just happen to transfer pollen from flower to flower and do pollination. It's called mesensoil pollination. Some beetles are predaceous and hunt other insects on the flower, like ladybugs, especially the larvae, are quite predaceous and are good for keeping your garden's aphids under control, for example. Adults may only be active for 4 weeks. Most of the life cycle is taken up in the egg or larval form. And like flies, the eggs are laid near the larval food source, whether it be deadwood, insect prey, termite insects, plant gulls. And again, the female lays the eggs and goes off, and the young take care of themselves. Soft-winged flower beetles, there's a larvae and an adult, feed on the adults and eggs of other insects, including leafhoppers and cinch bugs. So they're really good to have in your garden. So it's nice to know, to sort of look and see what are the advantageous beetles to have in your garden as opposed to something like the Colorado potato beetle. Locust borers are really neat. They burrow into locust wood and feed. The larvae feed on the dead on locust. And they emerge in late summer and feed on goldenrod pollen. They may take a couple, 3 years to mature, because these are big beetles. The beetles are like this long. They're quite large. And here's some other pictures of the soldier beetle and the locust borer that I took near. This was at my house in Mon County. This was at the office in Farmington. And this sweet little guy, this is a dogbane leaf beetle, which specializes on dogbane, which is one of the sort of milkweed relatives. but one of the most beautiful beetles we have in West Virginia with the iridescence and such. Okay. Rare butterflies we have in West Virginia is based on larval host plant. Certain butterflies only eat certain larval host plants. The caterpillars specialize, like some of the bees specialize on pollen. Some of the butterflies specialize on certain plants in order for the caterpillar to mature. And also climate. Because some of the host plants may occur statewide, but they're stuck on little shale barrens in Eastern Panhandle, for example. So most declining butterflies in West Virginia occur in 3 habitat types. Eastern dry oak shale barrens, such as this, high elevation wetlands, or northern hardwoods, such like that. So declines of most butterflies can be linked to 3 primary threats. Habitat loss, which occurs, if you have a species that's declining, often it is due, the main thing is due to habitat loss or degradation. Back in the 80s and 90s, landscape level application of pesticides in West Virginia, mostly to control gypsy moth, and exotic or invasive species. So in northern hardwoods, we have 3 species we sort of highlight: the West Virginia white, which is this wonderful little guy right here, the green comma, which is that, and the gray comma. The green and gray commas are both northern species. Like a lot of species, you see, if you look at range maps, you have this little peninsula trickling down through the Appalachians on the range maps. And that's what these guys are fairly common, for example, up in Canada. But down here, they run into problems. We think they both may be affected by climate change, but causes for the declines are hard to parse out. We know that green commas are because of the adelgids that are attacking both Fraser firs and hemlocks. It's thought that's changing microclimates a little bit, and that may be affecting this guy right here. So that may be actually be due from an invasive exotic species that's attacking their habitat. The West Virginia white was formerly found pretty much statewide, but it's contracted pretty much to the mountains because of this plant right here, garlic mustard. And we wish they were smarter, but they aren't, because it's in the same family as the cutleaf toothwort. It's a mustard. And these guys mistake this for that. And when they lay their eggs on the garlic mustard and the larvae hatch, and they start eating the garlic mustard, they die. And so they're poisoning themselves, unfortunately.
So it's not the elimination of the toothwort, it's just they don't recognize the garlic
Yeah,
mustard.
yeah. I mean, toothworts grow statewide.
Right.
And, you know, you can still find West Virginia whites in other parts of the state, certainly, but they're much, much less common than they used to be because of the proliferation of garlic mustard.
Because
It
they lay their eggs
overwhelms,
on.
yeah, it overwhelms the toothwort, and, you know, the West Virginia white female, she wants to lay her eggs. Oh, this seems right. They have sensory cells on their feet that are olfactory, and they sort of taste the plants to see. That's why you see a butterfly sort of flitting from plant to plant. That's probably a female trying to find a larval host plant. And they find the garlic mustard and say, oh, this seems right, lay the egg. But unfortunately, the larvae will not survive on that.
Because there's not enough nutrition in the leaf for the...
It's actually toxic. It's toxic to them. Some of the compounds in there kill them.
How long has garlic mustard been noticed in West Virginia? How many decades, do you know? I know that's not what you're talking about.
That's okay. I don't know the answer to that. I'm thinking it's been, because it's so, it's you know, all over the state, I'm guessing it's been here for a number of decades certainly. But that's something to look up probably. I should probably know it then.
You can look it up and tell us.
We'll do that. High elevation wetlands up in the mountains. We're looking at 3 species: Baltimore checker spot, black dash, and bog copper. This is our little bog copper. The only colony we have is up at Cranesville in Preston County. Cranesville Preserve, which is a Nature Conservancy preserve. And there's plenty of habitat further south. But this is a gossamer wing. We were talking about like the ashers and such. And these guys, they're little tiny things, they're weak flyers, and unless another patch of habitat is available within like half a mile, they're not going to make it to it. They're not going to go after it. So bog coppers, the further south they get, is Preston County, West Virginia. They're common up north. You go up into Canada and Minnesota and other places like that. They're all over the place, but just not here. The black dash is a little skipper. It's scattered in high elevation wetlands with certain species of sedges, especially Carex stricta. And again, habitat occurs, further away. We have this species. It's up at Cranesville in Preston County. It's also found in a couple places down in some wetlands in the mountains, but it's always been very rare. It's hard to find. We're not quite sure why it is so limited in its ability to both fly to. Carex stricta is very, very common. You find it along rivers and streams and every place else. It's a very common sedge. But it may need a very large amount of it, perhaps. It may need it in wetlands as opposed to a narrow linear area like along a stream or something, like up at Red Creek, maybe in Lanesville or something. So again, there's a lot of stuff we don't know about these species, unfortunately. Baltimore checker spots was formerly more widely distributed. Most of the recent records now are from the mountains, so we found them in a few other places now. Its larval host is turtlehead, which is deer candy. So this species distribution may have been affected by increased deer populations, and also people draining wetlands and damp areas because turtlehead likes its feet wet, and so farmers put in tile into a field, development happens and little wetlands get filled in. So this is what may also be happening to the Baltimore checker spot. And also, in certain places where you had wetlands near where they're doing gypsy moth spraying, some of the colonies were impacted by that as well. And into the shale barrens, the dry, almost impossibly hot areas in the summer. We'll get temperatures up to 110, 120 degrees on some of those shale barrens. And one of our rarest ones we have is the Appalachian grizzled skipper. Back in the 90s, we thought it had been extirpated by the state, but we found a colony down in Greenbrier County near White Sulphur Springs. So we have one known colony of grizzled skipper now that we monitor each year. So all these guys, this is the silvery blue, a nice little blue, very easy to identify with bright sky blue on their wings and these little dots on their hind wings that are circled with white. Both of these occur on these dry shale barrens. And shale barrens are a unique habitat that we have in the Appalachians. They have unique vegetation. Some of these species only feed on vegetation that is found in the shale barrens. Grizzled skippers are one of them. They feed on a little plant called Canada cinquefoil, which is found statewide. It's everywhere. It's a common lawn plant, if you don't do the lawn herbicides and stuff like that. But something about the shale barrens, we think probably overwintering maybe. They curl up the leaf and eat the Canada cinquefoil, then they pupate, and then they emerge in the spring. But we think that overwintering they need that dry habitat, perhaps. We're not sure. Again, that's one of the things we do not know. The silvery blue feeds on a plant that's pretty much only found on shale barrens or those dry habitats called Carolina vetch. And northern crescents are another one, which are really spotty. Unfortunately, they look almost exactly like a ubiquitous species called the pearl crescent. Very, very similar. Except the males have orange clubs on their antennae. But a lot of the female pearl crescents have orange clubs, so it's an interesting situation. Anyways, these guys, we're unsure exactly what's going on with them, but they like these dry, oaky habitats as well. So, and this is a cobweb skipper, which we do still have in the state in fair numbers. It was probably also impacted by gypsy moth spraying, but perhaps because its phenology wasn't exactly like that of, for example, the grizzled skipper, they didn't have the gypsy moth spraying didn't have the impact. The gypsy moth, we had 14 or 15 colonies in the eastern panhandle. They are all wiped out. There's no grizzled skippers in the eastern panhandle anymore in the state. It still occurs a little bit in Pennsylvania. Maryland doesn't have any, and Virginia has some as well. So widespread use of pesticides likely extirpated at least 3 of West Virginia's butterflies. These were all shale-bearing species that we found in those dry, oaky, shaly sort of sites. Columbine means the wild columbine. If you have lots of wild columbine, you look for it. Nothing. Both the Perseus and the mottled dusky wing, though, have declined severely over their whole range. So I can't really blame Jiffy Moth spraying completely on this. There's something else going on with those guys. They're just disappearing range-wide. They'll likely go extinct sometime in the future. Other butterflies have been impacted by habitat loss from development, changing agricultural practices like monarchs, and afforestation, which is family farms getting forested again. So we're losing a lot of the early successional habitat. We've lost a lot of the early successional habitat in the state. So the DNR and other agencies are trying to cut down some trees and to provide that early successional habitat. What Doug was talking about last night, about how the Native Americans would do a lot of burning, and so the state was a whole mosaic of mature timber, early forests, grasslands, shrublands, and right now the whole state is sort of even aged from back of, trees started growing again like about 1920 or so, 1910. And that's fine, but you don't have the habitat that provides the homes for a lot of these more diverse species. So nobody likes a timber job. It's messy, it's cutting down trees, but looking at a big, beautiful forest is basically an aesthetic response from us. You have to look at the bigger picture. What habitats have been lost because of that big, beautiful forest? So anyways, it's something to think about. Okay. So habitat management for grizzled skipper, since this is one I've been involved in quite a bit. And this goes for almost any pollinator to a large extent. No pesticides. We daylight. This is the site in Greenbrier County. So a lot of shrubs and stuff growing here, and so we cut down all the shrubs so it gets a lot of daylight and heat and everything. We encourage the growth of the larva host of nectar plants. This is all creeping phlox, all this white stuff. And this actually, well, it's a lot of candles cinquefoil, but it's hard to see the yellow. And we avoid prescribed burns because the young, like in the early spring before they come out, all the baby caterpillars, all the pupa, are down underneath the tussocks of the Canada cinquefoil. So if you burn that, you're going to burn them up. So a lot of foresters love to use prescribed fire, and it's a very valuable tool in certain situations. It's great, but not here. You can't use it here. So results, we had a 100% increase in skippers detected, so we saw lots of skippers. And it's likely due to management, and also we got the survey really right. Because these guys are tricky. You have to get it just right. It's a sunny day, it has to be warm. If it's rainy, it's no good. So anyways.
Where in Greenbrier County is that?
Near White Sulphur Springs. It's on, luckily it's on National Forest land, so certain people can't touch it. Okay, monarchs, the bug that took over my life. It is currently being reviewed by Fish and Wildlife Service for listing under the Endangered Species Act. The decision was supposed to be the end of June. That has been extended because after doing the species status assessment that I was involved in, and we were pretty, it was a pretty good assessment, but there was a lot of uncertainty because this is a bug that is international. It occurs in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It migrates. It has a really funky life history where most of the adults only live a few weeks. Then you have the migratory generation that lives for months and months and months. And so it's very complex. And the folks at Fish and Wildlife really wanted some answers. And so the decision has been delayed until December 15th, 2020. And at that time, they're going to do, between then and now, they're gathering more data and more research and trying to give a better, so that the decision can be based on better knowledge and data, instead of just trying to guess it. Because something like this, if this is listed, it's going to be a big deal, and you want to make the right decision. You want to do it the right way. So people say, oh, you got to listen, you got to listen. Well, you got to make the right decision. So that's what the delay is about. So I support the delay. I think it's a wise choice. population declines for the monarch are based on Mexico. It was past heavy timbering at the wintering areas, the little colonies where they occur in central Mexico. It's a little bit west of Mexico City. High elevation fir forests related to our balsam fir. It's called Oyamel firs, Abies religiosa. And it's a valuable timber tree. Big, tall, straight trunks and everything. And there were some timber reserves on there that were legally cut, but then there's been poaching as well. That's declined for a fair amount, but some damage has been done to the overwintering colonies because when monarchs are overwintering, they need a certain microclimate. They huddle, you've all seen pictures of monarchs on the sites, I'm sure, but they're huddling on the branches, they're huddling on the trunks, because the trees are a heat sink, and so they're actually a little bit warmer, and then they only use trees that are a little bit below the ridge line, so they can stay, the wind doesn't get at them, and the boughs and everything help to create a microclimate, a little blanket around it, to the extent it's a little warmer, a little more humid, but not wet. If you take out those trees, you create gaps in the colonies, and so more coldness and ice and snow and everything can get in there, and you're going to have more mortality. And that's something that occurs naturally there. You have a species, the numbers in the millions, you're going to have some mortality during migration and during the overwintering process as well. But it's been exacerbated because of the timber disintegrating. We had some drought in Texas, so we had low recruitment initially. That was this right down here, where this is a graph of the overwintering colonies. This is the actual area that they covered. They don't count them. I mean, you got millions and millions of insects. So they take aerial photographs and they trace them, and then they estimate the area, and that's where this comes from. So back in the winter of 2013, 2014, they only covered 1.7 acres, which is tiny. When you think of the historic high was almost 45 acres. So they've really declined big time. Currently the most recent one, 2018, 2019, we're up to 14.9 acres. Yay! And 6 hectares, this line right here, which is about 14 acres, is important because looking at it, folks doing the modeling and looking as a whole at the population and how the population responds to things, think that 6 hectares, an average of 6 hectares over time can support the population. So that's magic to get up to that. We hadn't gotten up to that since 2006. So that was a big deal this year. Everybody popped some champagne bottles. It was great. But the most significant thing for monarch conservation, besides the timbering and the microclimate changes and some usual drought and everything, is that in the Midwest, in what's called the North Fork, that band underneath the Great Lakes, which is also our corn and soybean belt, it's a very valuable agricultural area. In the late 90s, they started, Monsanto and other companies developed herbicide-resistant crops so that you could plant corn and soybeans, spray them with Roundup, and kill all the weeds in the fields. And the farmers thought this was great. Number one, for very good reasons, they could use what's called no-till planting. So they have much less erosion, less sediment going into streams and everything else, so it led to better water quality in the streams and rivers in that area of the country. It gave them better yields, and without having a lot of weeds in the fields, it made harvesting much more economical because, for example, milkweed, with all the latex in the milkweed, it would gum up the gears. They had to stop and clean it out and everything. So they thought this was great. Unfortunately, the monarch decline was an unintended consequence because monarchs preferred all these beautiful, healthy, big milkweeds growing in the agricultural fields. They used them like in Iowa, they used them like a 4-to-1 margin over stuff in regular fields and natural areas. So all the milkweed basically disappeared from any agricultural field in the Midwest. Roundup is used in 94% of the fields, maybe a little bit more now. It's the Roundup ready crops, the GMO crops are not going to go away. They're here to stay, so we have to adapt. So there was a lot of work done. For example, in the intro, they mentioned the Mid-America Monarch Strategy. I was a part of that. And it's basically a plan looking at all sectors: agriculture, urban, roadways, right-of-ways, conservation lands, anything. It says, okay, everybody has to work together to plant milkweed and provide nectar resources for the monarch. And this is a strategy that moves that plan forward so that this breadbasket for both us and for monarchs, we can get the monarch populations back up. So that's what's going on now. We're trying to implement conservation for monarch butterflies, which also helps all pollinators, because all pollinators need no pesticides. They need flowering resources in order to live throughout the growing season. The bees need areas where they can build their nests underground, so they need those nicely sparsely vegetated soil areas that aren't disturbed. So all these things benefit both the monarchs and the pollinators. So having the pollinator be sort of the poster child, or having the monarch be the poster child for pollinators really helps, all of us. Because without pollinators, we're going to have a tough time eating. So it's pretty important. Okay, did that. So some of the problems some of the pollinators are having, of course, you've all heard about colony collapse disorder with European honeybees. Probably caused by a suite of problems, including parasites and pathogens, such as mites, nosema. Could have some stuff to do with pesticides like neonicotinoids. Stress related to industrial pollination, where they haul hives around to pollinate almond crops or alfalfa or anything else. The agricultural community, I think, has woken up. It's getting better about managing domesticated pollinators like honeybees, orchard bees, and such like that. So I think it's getting better, but we're still playing catch up because we're still having declines. Some species of native bees have been threatened to the extent they've been proposed or have been listed under the Endangered Species Act. Rusty patch bumblebee is one which does occur in West Virginia. We have a few recent records for it. Yellow-banded bumblebee also occurs in West Virginia. They're going to make a decision on the yellow-banded in 2020 or 2021. This one has already been listed. This is listed as endangered. So up in the mountains where it's easily finding it, it's become what's called a federal nexus for development pressures up there. So it's gotten kind of interesting. So we'll see what happens. So both of these species just need good, rich nectar resources, wooded areas to nest in. That's all they need, and no pesticides. A lot of the bumblebees and pollinators, especially in the Midwest, but especially out west, pesticides has been a real problem, and lack of native species in order to nectar from. So remember, we were talking about nectar and pollen isn't made all the same across all species of flowers. So some of these guys are missing some of the nutrition because of that, probably. Okay. So pollinator management guidelines. Limit pesticides, what we're talking about. If you need to use some pesticides or herbicides especially, do spot spraying, don't broadcast spray. Find the plant you want to kill, zap it, that's it. Or try pulling it up, for example. And also cutting. Sam Droege, he lives down near Beltsville, Maryland, which is like invasive plant heaven down there. He uses a weed whacker, which is very effective. He goes and cuts stuff down all the time. Gets rid of this plant and that plant, so he releases the natives in order to grow. For agencies and stuff that need to spray for gypsy moth, there's a pesticide called Gypcheck, which is specific for gypsy moth only. So you don't get additional kill of non-target species. It's more expensive, but it is important. For example, that the grizzled skipper colony in Greenbrier County, we made sure that Department of Ag used Gypcheck when they had a spray there. It was many years ago that they used that. Maintain or enhance foraging habitat. So people who like to mow recreationally, we try to get them to change their habits. So they're mowing 5 acres a week. It's like, anyways. So try to reduce or eliminate weekly mowing. Often, you want your lawn around your house, and this is folks that live out in rural areas. In the suburbs, it's tough because you got close neighbors and everything. But anyways, in rural areas, you can have a nice band of lawn, but then you can have some nice meadow below that, for example. So that's a way to do it. Eliminate herbicides along roadsides. Many of our roadsides in West Virginia, because it's so forested, the roadsides is where the flower resources occur. So we're working with DOH to try to fine-tune their mowing or herbicide use. Because often the guys, they get in there, and they just need a strip like, that wide as the right-of-way. But it's like, all the way up there. So try to get them not to be so enthusiastic about things. And they're going to be introducing, remember the wildflower plantings along the interstates and stuff? It's all cosmos, California poppy, clover, all invasive species, well, non-native certainly, annuals. So they're actually developing, or we help them develop a pollinator mix that they're going to be doing. They're going to be changing some of their mowing regimes and everything else. So the DOH is starting to get on board as well, which is really excellent. Because that's one of our most important places where a lot of pollinators and butterflies come from forages and roadsides. Beware of prescribed burns, like for the grizzled skipper, maybe killing the baby in the basket as well. Let's see. Maintain or enhance bee nesting habitat. You have a bank, like it's sparsely vegetated. I mean, that's great. I know of one down a little bit south of me, near a colleague where a colleague lives. And they have a wonderful colony of bees living there. It's just really cool, and they don't hurt you at all. You can you can walk right through there, and they wouldn't touch you at all. Solitary bees typically don't sting unless you're actually handling them. You squish them in your fist or something like that. They just don't sting. They're not like honeybees or hornets or even bumblebees that they have this colonial nest that they're defending. They just have their own thing, and the female she's not going to mess. One individual bee isn't going to mess with you. So avoid soil compaction, running machinery over and over a certain area. And they need a mosaic of nesting and foraging habitats, because where the female might want to put her nest, she needs some flowers within a fairly close distance. It can't be miles and miles away. It has to be within like a quarter mile or so, for example, even a little bit less than that. And maintain and enhance butterfly and larval host plants. Again, limiting the mowing. And leaving weedy patches. You got a little back corner of your yard that has some weeds, that has some asters, maybe a couple nettles, things like that. Those are great larval host plants. Those are really important. And I forgot to bring that. Anyways, so important, like for butterfly larval host plants, asters, nettles, a lot of our trees like oaks and such are important. Grasses are important for many, many of the skippers. So there's a whole host of our native species that our butterflies need for the baby seed. It isn't just the adults. If you don't provide habitat for the caterpillars, you're going to have a hard time seeing the adults. That's it, yes. Okay, where can you go to get fun stuff? And there's tons and tons of projects, citizen science projects out there as well, which if you talk with your Master Naturalist coordinator or whatever, and you want to get involved in some of these, a lot of this might count for your volunteer hours, so you can keep that in mind. So there's the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, millionpollinatorgardens.org, and what I can do, I can see if I can bring these up on my computer as well. Pollinator Partnership at pollinator.org. They have several programs, and also they have oodles and oodles and oodles of downloadable brochures and other resources. If you want to do some teaching in schools or something like that, that can be very helpful. Monarchwatch.org, if you want to get involved in tagging monarchs or putting in a monarch way station. This is where you get the information for that. These are the guys that actually also go down and help with, down in Mexico, with determining how large a overwintering population of the eastern monarch is. But also, there's also a population of western monarchs that overwinter along the California coast, or the Pacific coast, which is in they're in worse shape than the eastern population. It's really dicey for them. Xerces Society is this is the granddaddy of the invertebrate sort of websites. It's Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, but they've dived headfirst into all the pollinator and monarch stuff. They have a lot of resources. It has more of a Western feel to it since it's based in Oregon. So they have more Western stuff in it, but they do really good science. If you want to dig into some technical stuff and have some questions, that's a good site to go to. They have lots of really good papers available. And if you're a member of a garden club, they have been supporting pollinator research for a few years now. This is an old one. I have to go online and see and update this. But they are looking into the causes of pollinator decline and trying to find ways to help counteract it. And so if you're a member of the garden club, bug whoever the president is, maybe you can come up with a project associated with that. So that's something to do as well. So that's what I have right now. It is sort of stopped raining. No, it's still raining. So, okay. Why don't we take a break, and I can teach you about butterfly identification more than like the briefing I did here. I can do a program specifically just on monarchs. I can teach you about monarch butterflies. I can show you where you can, some websites where you can identify bees. So think about it and let me know what you guys would like to do for a little bit more time, because I can't let you out now. It's just a bit too early. So. Or if you want to leave, that's fine too. If you got stuff you got to do. But I have plenty of other information that I can partake in and give to you, so I can teach you. Yes.
I don't know how much interest others have. I've been trying to actually grow a meadow without doing all the plowing and the this and the this and the this.
I can talk about some, so you want to hear about habitat. Yeah, I can talk about some habitat too.
So
Yeah.
I'm interested, and if others are, then we can all band together and say, how about that?
Okay. Who wants to do some habitat stuff? Okay, we'll do some habitat stuff. Why don't you take a break, take like 5-10 minutes, come up, take a look at some of the stuff. Again, be very careful of this cord, and we can talk about habitat when we come back. So let's say, be back in here at 10:20. I'll give you 10 minutes. Oh, yeah.